Push a garden fork into a compost pile that smells sour, and you can feel the problem before you see it. The fork does not slide through loose crumbs. It stops in a heavy, wet mat. The strange part is that pile may be full of good kitchen scraps, grass clippings, coffee grounds, and leaves. But if air cannot move through it, decomposition slows into rot. By the end, you will know how to put oxygen back into compost before the pile turns against itself. Compost does not fail because scraps are bad. It fails when the pile cannot breathe. That is the mistake most gardeners miss. Because a compost pile looks simple from the outside. You throw in banana peels, vegetable scraps, old leaves, garden waste, maybe a handful of coffee grounds, and you expect nature to handle the rest. And sometimes it does. A loose pile with enough dry material and enough open space can break down quietly with very little drama. But a compacted pile is different. It can look rich and dark. It can feel moist. It can seem active. Yet inside, the spaces between the materials have collapsed. Water fills the gaps where air should be. Wet grass mats together. Food scraps settle into pockets. Coffee grounds clump. Leaves press flat. The pile becomes less like a living compost system and more like a sealed, soggy block. That is when the smell changes. Healthy compost has an earthy smell, or at least a mild garden smell. A troubled pile smells sour, rotten, swampy, or sharp. That odor is not just unpleasant. It is a message. It means the process inside the pile has shifted. The organisms that work best with oxygen are no longer getting enough of it, and the pile is starting to behave like a wet, trapped mass instead of a breathing system. There is a big difference between decomposing and rotting. Decomposing, in a good compost pile, means oxygen-loving microbes are breaking down organic material in a way that gradually turns scraps into dark, crumbly, earthy compost. The material changes. It softens. It heats when conditions are right. It loses its original shape. It becomes something the garden can use. Rotting is what happens when too much of the pile is wet, dense, and airless. It is still breakdown, but it is a slower, smellier, less controlled kind. Instead of a loose structure with oxygen moving through it, you get sealed pockets where the wrong conditions take over. This is where most gardeners get misled. They think the smell means the pile needs more compost starter, more soil, more scraps, or more time. Sometimes the real problem is simpler than that. The pile needs air. Air is not decoration in compost. It is one of the ingredients. You can see the food scraps. You can see the leaves. You can feel the moisture. But the invisible ingredient is oxygen, and when that disappears, the whole process changes. A compost pile can be full of food and still be starving for air. Picture two piles side by side. One is dark, wet, and packed down. When you lift a forkful, it comes up in heavy clumps. The pieces stick together. The center smells sour. You may still recognize scraps from weeks ago, because the pile has not been breaking them down evenly. The other pile looks less dramatic. It has dry leaves mixed through it. There are little pieces of twig, shredded cardboard, or straw holding spaces open. When you lift it with a fork, it breaks apart. It feels damp but not dripping. It has structure. The second pile is not working because it has some secret ingredient. It is working because it has room to breathe. The most common way gardeners cut off that air is by adding too much wet green material at once. Fresh grass clippings are a classic example. They look harmless when they are fluffy on the lawn. But once they sit in a pile, they can collapse into a dense, wet layer. Kitchen scraps can do the same thing. Coffee grounds can clump. Soft vegetable waste can pack together. If those materials are added without enough dry, bulky carbon mixed in, they fill the pile with moisture and weight, but not structure. That sounds like a food problem, but it usually starts as an air problem. Greens bring nitrogen and moisture. Browns bring carbon and structure. The gardener often remembers the first part and forgets the second. The pile gets plenty of greens because kitchen scraps arrive every day. Grass clippings arrive in big loads. Coffee grounds feel useful, so they keep going in. But the dry leaves, shredded cardboard, straw, small twigs, and woodier pieces are what keep the pile open. Without them, the pile may become too rich for its own good. That is the safe contradiction at the center of this mistake. More good material can make worse compost if it removes the air. A pile that has too many wet greens often gives 3 warnings. The first warning is smell. If the pile smells rotten, sour, or like a swamp, do not just cover the top and hope it disappears. The smell is telling you that too much of the pile is sitting without enough oxygen. The second warning is texture. If the material comes up in slabs, mats, or sticky clumps, the pile has lost pore space. A fork should be able to lift and loosen composting material. If the fork pulls up a heavy blanket of wet grass, the pile is not breathing well. The third warning is slow breakdown. If scraps remain recognizable for a long time, Especially in wet pockets, the pile may not be too cold or too weak. It may be too dense. The microbes that do the clean, fast work need oxygen moving through the material. Once you see it this way, the symptom makes sense. The fix is not to dump in a miracle starter. The fix is to rebuild the structure of the pile. Start with the base. If you are building a new pile, do not begin with a wet layer of food scraps or fresh grass. Begin with a loose layer of bulky browns. Small twigs, coarse dry leaves, wood chips, chopped stems, or rough straw can create a lifted bottom that lets air enter from below. That bottom layer should not be a solid floor. It should be a loose breathing layer. Then think of every wet addition as something that needs to be opened up. When you add kitchen scraps, do not leave them as a wet pocket. Mix them with dry browns. Shredded leaves, torn cardboard without glossy coating, straw, small wood chips, and dry garden stems can all help. A simple backyard rule is to use more browns than greens by volume. For many piles, 2 or 3 parts dry browns for 1 part wet greens is a useful starting point. The exact mix can change with your materials, but the principle does not change. Wet food needs dry structure around it. Then cover fresh scraps. This matters more than many people think. A layer of dry leaves or other browns over kitchen waste helps control odor, discourages flies, and keeps the wet scraps from sitting exposed as a slimy layer. 4 to 8 inches of dry cover is a practical target when you are burying fresh food scraps in an outdoor pile. But covering is not the same as sealing. Do not press the pile down to make room. Do not stomp on it. Do not pack it like a trash bag. Compost needs contact, but it also needs space. The goal is not a loose mess where everything dries out. The goal is a damp, open mixture where materials touch each other without collapsing into a block. The moisture test is simple. Take a handful from the active part of the pile and squeeze it. It should feel like a wrung-out sponge. Damp, not dusty. Moist, not dripping. If water runs out, or several drops squeeze through your fingers, the pile is too wet and probably losing air. Add dry browns and loosen it. If it falls apart like dry cereal and nothing seems to be happening, add a little water and mix. The squeeze test tells you more than the surface does. The top of a compost pile can look dry while the center is too wet. Or the top can look moist while the inside is packed and sour. You need to check the middle, because the middle is where the oxygen disappears first. If your pile already smells bad, do not panic. A smelly pile is not ruined. It is giving you instructions. Open it up with a garden fork. Pull apart the wet mats. Break up the clumps. Add dry browns as you go, not just on top. Mix in enough loose material that the pile changes texture in your hands. You should feel it go from heavy and sealed to lighter and more open. If the pile is extremely wet, let it drain and protect it from heavy rain for a while, but do not seal it in plastic without airflow. A wet pile under a tight cover can stay airless. Then turn it. Turning does 2 things. It brings oxygen back into the pile, and it redistributes wet and dry zones. The outside material moves inward. The soggy center gets opened. The dry edges get mixed with the moist middle. You do not have to turn every backyard pile constantly, but when a pile smells bad or forms mats, turning is not optional maintenance. It is the correction. There is one objection worth taking seriously. Some gardeners say, but forests do not turn. They're compost. Leaves fall, and nature handles it. That is true, but a backyard compost pile is not a forest floor. A forest layer is usually spread thin, with twigs, leaf litter, fungi, insects, roots, and soil contact across a broad surface. A compost bin is concentrated. It receives food scraps in pockets, grass clippings in loads, and moisture in a smaller space. The pile can do what nature does, but only if the structure lets air move. The old pile behind the shed that slowly turns into compost over 2 years may get away with neglect because it is loose, leafy, and patient. A wet bin packed with food scraps and grass clippings cannot. This is also why chopping materials is useful only up to a point. Smaller pieces break down faster because microbes get more surface area. But if everything is too fine and wet, the pile can compact. Sawdust, coffee grounds, chopped grass, and soft scraps can become a dense paste when they are not balanced with coarser browns. Fine material needs bulky material beside it. A compost pile wants a mix of sizes. Some small pieces for breakdown, some rough pieces for airflow. That mix is what gives the pile lungs. A good pile is not just a recipe of ingredients. It is a physical structure. It has moisture, but not saturation. It has nitrogen, but not a wet overload. It has carbon, but not only slow, woody material. It has contact, but not compaction. And it has air spaces that survive after rain, after adding scraps, and after the pile settles. You can diagnose your pile in less than a minute. First, smell the center, not just the top. Earthy is good. Sour, rotten, or swampy means check oxygen and moisture. Second, lift a forkful. Loose, mixed, and crumbly is a good sign. Heavy slabs, wet mats, or sticky balls mean it needs dry structure. Third, squeeze a handful. Damp like a wrung-out sponge is the target. Dripping means too wet. Dusty means too dry. Fourth, look for old scraps. A few stubborn pieces are normal, especially woody stems, eggshells, or pits. But if soft scraps are sitting unchanged in wet pockets, the pile is not breaking down evenly. The correction follows the diagnosis. If it smells and feels wet, add dry browns and turn. If it smells and is packed, break up mats and add coarse material. If it is dry and inactive, moisten and mix. If it is mostly grass, leaves, and food with no structure, add twigs, shredded cardboard, straw, or dry leaves. If it is mostly wood chips and nothing is happening, add greens and moisture. What you should not do is keep feeding a suffocating pile the same way. Do not add another bucket of scraps into a wet center and cover it with a thin sprinkle of soil. Soil may hide the smell for a moment, but it does not rebuild airflow. Do not add more coffee grounds to a pile that is already clumped and sour. Coffee grounds can be useful in moderation, but they are not a cure for compaction. Do not bury wet food under wet grass. That is how a pile forms the exact airless pocket you are trying to avoid. And do not judge compost only by color. Dark does not always mean finished. A black, slimy pile may be wet and airless, not mature. Finished compost should feel loose and crumbly, with an earthy smell. If it smells rotten, sticks together, and still shows recognizable soft scraps, it needs more time, more air, and more dry structure before it belongs around plant roots. That matters because unfinished, sour material can create problems when mixed into beds too heavily. It may continue breaking down in the soil, tie up nutrients for a while, or create pockets that roots do not like. The safe move is to let the pile finish until it is stable, crumbly, and earthy. The payoff is not instant magic. It is steadier composting. When air returns, the pile often changes character. The bad smell begins to fade as the wet pockets open. The texture becomes easier to turn. The center can heat more evenly when the mix is right. Scraps disappear more predictably. The pile, a parte falência, stops feeling like a garbage problem and starts behaving like a soil-making system. That is the point most gardeners remember. The air is an ingredient. You cannot see it in the bucket of scraps. You cannot hold it like dry leaves or grass clippings. But without it, the pile changes direction. It stops feeding the clean process you wanted and starts suffocating the organisms that were supposed to do the work. Go back to that garden fork in the sour, compacted pile. At the beginning, it hit a wet wall. That wall was the mistake. Not the banana peels. Not the leaves. Not the idea of composting. The mistake was the collapsed space between the materials. Now imagine lifting that same fork after the pile has been opened, mixed with dry browns, and brought back to the right moisture. The material falls apart instead of tearing loose in slabs. It smells less sour. You can see little gaps where air can move. The pile has not become fancy. It has become breathable. That is what composting was, asking for the whole time. A compost pile without oxygen is not feeding soil. It is suffocating the process. But a pile with air, moisture, greens, browns, and structure is not just a heap of scraps. It is a quiet engine. And once you learn to hear what texture, smell, and moisture are telling you, you stop treating compost like waste. You start treating it like something alive enough to need breathing room.